following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. San Francisco Giants baseball. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and the host is here, Mr. Michael Duca. How are you, sir?
I'm fabulous, Ralph. How about yourself?
I am too, and it's getting to be spring training. There was a terrific Paul been put on all of it in the last day or so. Former owner of the Giants, Peter Mcgowan, passed away unexpectedly, 76 years old, much too young. And I'd like, Michael, if you would be so kind to talk about him and what he meant to the Giants.
Sure, Ralph. You know, we can kind of let people know that we do at least set these up a few days in advance. We don't pre-rehearse, we don't practice, we don't have a script, but we do at least know that we're going to get together on Monday at 1 o'clock. And when we set this up, this was not on the horizon at all. So we're all kind of still in reactive mode here. Honestly, the last time I saw Peter was late September, and I saw him in the tunnels beneath the ballpark of what was then AT&T. And he didn't look well. He didn't look well at all. He was walking hunched over, and his pallor was very gray, and he was in obvious discomfort as he was walking. And as always, he was Peter. He greeted me by name. He seemed to remember everybody that he'd met. And I asked him sincerely, "How are you doing?" And he said, "Well, not very well. I hope to see another spring training." He had been dealing with multiple forms of cancer, including cancer of the liver, under which he went a very experimental and radical procedure a couple of years ago that had a very low chance of survival at the time, but he did manage to come through that and live for another 2.5 years. You know, he was, the best thing I can say is that at that moment in time, he was kind of a living profile in courage, if you will, Ralph. He had 2 large sacks of goodies for his grandchildren from the dugout store. And I got the feeling that, you know, family and being around his baseball family were the things that were keeping him going at the time. Always kind, always polite, a good listener, and, you know, I'm going to share with you, you haven't asked me to, but I'm going to share with you my most enduring memory of Peter. And it was, more than 20 years ago, when there was serious discussion and you remember this, Ralph, the commissioner at the time was discussing radical realignment.
Was this when Atlanta was playing in the Western Division, or was it after that?
No, it was after that. The radical realignment was going to be combining all of baseball into one league and having either 4 or 6 geographic divisions. And it was trying to solve the fundamental problem of Texas being in the West and being 2 time zones away from every other team in its division.
And travel, they were trying to cut down on travel expenses, too, if I remember.
Well, yeah, what they were really concerned about was that almost, you know, something like 50% of Texas's road games were starting at 9 or 9:30 at night on local television, and so people just weren't watching them. So anyway, there was an owners' meeting, if I remember correctly, it was in Chicago at the time, and I was writing at the time for Total Baseball Daily, which was a newsletter that was sent out. This will tell you how long ago it was out. A newsletter that was sent out to listservs, and I remember trying to contact Peter to get his take on this because it was going to throw him into a division that was going to cost him some of his great natural rivalries and some of his, cherished road destinations. It was going to become an occasional thing to visit the Cubs or the Mets or the Braves. And what I remember is that Peter made a speech before the owners, and he instructed his administrative assistant to fax me a copy of that speech, which was given before a private meeting with no media involved. He faxed me a copy of that speech 3 hours before he delivered it. There were two of us who got the speech, myself and Murray Chaps. And the simple fact that basically a genuinely nobody like me at that point in my life would be taken at face value by a Peter Mcgowan, would be taken as someone who had a genuine love for the game and a care and concern for the game and not an axe to grind, and who just wanted to be able to keep people informed as to what was going on behind the scenes. It never left me. There was never a time when I did not see Peter and feel thankful about that incident.
Nice memory. Nice memory, Michael. Let me give my appreciation for Peter as a former New York Giant fan. Peter did what no other owner in baseball has ever done when a franchise has been switched, including L.A. with their Brooklyn Dodgers. He has devoted a part of his ballpark, and he and Larry Baer are basically responsible for that ballpark. Without them, would you agree there's no Giants in San Francisco at this point in time?
The group is larger than that, but they were prime movers. I would have to include Sue and Harmon Burns and Walter Shorenstein in the group also.
Okay. All right. Thank you for noting them. But my point is that he pays homage to that great New York Giant franchise, and it really has made it a continuation. It's just one big franchise. If you look at the wall, the history of the Giants in New York, he pays tremendous homage to the Bobby Thompson years. He goes back as far as Mel Ott and all these things. It's a terrific honor as a Giant fan, as a kid who had the rug pulled out from under him or her, whoever it is. One's team left. You were a kid and your team left. That's a horrible thing. Well, to see them honor that team, and I have the good fortune of living in Northern California and have for most of my life, nothing can be said about that. Is class. He didn't have to do that. And it's done in so many different ways, Ralph. I mean, I'm going to tell you some of the things that were there. If you drive over the Lefty O'Doul Bridge, there's a parking lot right outside the stadium there that's behind the gate, and the wall of that parking lot, the back wall of that parking lot, lists all the pennant years, the Cy Young winners, the World Championships, and it's seamless. It's New York, it's San Francisco, it's all one family. If you look at my 2014 World Series ring, there are 8 large diamonds on the ring. The 3 biggest ones represent the 2010, 2012, and 2014 championships, but the 5 at the bottom honor the 5 World Championships won while representing the city of New York.
In 2010, the Giants won their first World Series, essentially almost in my lifetime. And what did they do? They took the trophy to New York.
Mm-hmm.
They let New York fans join in the celebration. They went to Foley's down on 2nd Avenue and displayed the trophy. They went to where the Polo Grounds had been and displayed the trophy. In another incident, they had, the Giants had the first player who lost his life fighting in World War I from Major League Baseball. And his plaque was lost to the move from New York to San Francisco, so they recreated it so that it could be outside the stadium in San Francisco. Nobody, for years it was the Yankees who were renowned for, their old-timers days and for bringing back their old players. But really today it is generally acknowledged throughout all of professional sports that nobody does a better job than the Giants do of honoring their past players, keeping people part of the organization. People laugh about, all you have to do is draw one paycheck and you're a forever Giant. But, you can laugh about that all you want. But a lot of that laugh is envy.
Yeah, and when they bring back players to commemorate certain eras and certain times, they don't just bring back the stars. Some teams will do that. You will see guys, the Jim Duffalos, that kind of thing, the John Pregingers, names that would mean nothing, but for these memories. It's a class How about that? The best way to describe the Giants organization under Mr. McGowan was just pure class.
Well, that's true. You also, I think, you have to acknowledge the steroid era and the fact that the Giants were major players in that, and that their clubhouse was a locus of it. And you have to acknowledge that Peter did look back on that era with some trepidation and some regret. But in general, I think if you're going to err, and all of us do, none of us do things right all the time. If you're going to err, if you err on the side of your players, if you err on the side of your employees, things are probably going to turn out pretty well most of the time.
Well, if Peter takes guilt for it, for that in any way, he has to remember that it was all of baseball, starting with Bud Selig from the top. So it wasn't just him, although the West Coast, with Balco and this and the A's and Bonds and what have you, it was all of baseball.
Well, yeah, if we wanted to get into this discussion, since we've just had the Hall of Fame announcement, my pet peeve is the guys who rise up on their sanctimonious white horses and say, I will never vote to put a cheater into the Hall of Fame, no matter how good his numbers are. The biggest cheerleaders during the steroid scandal were sports page editors. They were getting more space. They were getting more ads. They were getting more readers. They had something to write about because, 500-foot home runs are a lot more interesting to write about than fielder's choices that score the winning run.
You can make an argument that the McGuire-Sosa competition, or whatever you want to call it, saved baseball after the strike in much way that Babe Ruth saved it after the Black Sox scandal.
You absolutely can, and I'm going to draw a parallel that's much closer to home and reality right now. regardless of poll numbers and popularity numbers, let me tell you that the media that loves to rag on our current president absolutely adores him because he brings eyeballs. Regardless of whether you agree with him and watch or disagree with him and watch, he brings eyeballs. And so our president and his current way of dealing are as much a construct of how the media has dealt with him and how the media has thrived off of him as anything
I'll give you a good example of that.
background.
You're absolutely correct. The television is on to CNN, not the Major League channel, MLB, 90% of the time now, this house. It's on as background, CNN, to cover the theater of the craziness. And you're right. It's sometimes it's fueled by it. I'll give you a good example of how it's fueled by it. Trump opens up the government, and they're starting to talk settlement and what have you. And CNN does this entire rehash of it, where it goes back to Trump in the office with Schumer and Pelosi, and claiming it is his shutdown and all that. Go forward, news media. Don't dwell on it just for stirring people up. We need to come together, and both sides, CNN, Fox, and you could look at those two. They're so polarized. We have to do something to come together, and it does start. I'm not saying it's fake news or anything, but it starts with the media.
Well, and all of this was to get back to the Hall of Fame question and the steroid question, which is that when it was selling newspapers, when it was selling tickets, when it was keeping ballparks full after the disgrace of a canceled World Series, I don't remember very many, if any, beat writers being upset about it. I mean, good heavens, Mark McGwire had his product sitting with the label out in his locker. These guys weren't hiding it, and the
truth of the matter was the product that he had in his locker wasn't illegal at the time.
Right, and here's the thing: you've got all these people coming on with their sanctimony now, but I don't remember any of them failing to vote for Bonds as MVP. I don't remember them failing to vote for Roger Clemens as Cy Young Award winner. And these guys between them have the most. I mean, think about it for a moment. This is a sport that reflects American culture. And for good or for evil, no matter which side of the political divide you're on, you kind of have to acknowledge that America's history is one of forcibly acquiring chunks of the country and moving people off of it to the advantage of those who are moving onto it. Whether you call that genocide, whether you call that racism, or whether you just call it manifest destiny, or, hey, we did a better job than they did. I don't care which side of the divide you come down on. That's reality. The reality is that America was not bought in an arm's length transaction. It was heisted. So why shouldn't American
the founding fathers were slave owners. Everything was imperialism.
Right, and so why shouldn't its sport be able to reflect that? How can the best hitter, best slugger, and one of the best pitchers of all time by Cy Young winning standards at least, all be excluded from the shrine of the best players
Were they
in the
not
game?
playing against competition that were using as well? Were the relief
exactly.
pitchers?
Exactly. I mean, if you Joe Posnanski has a tweet out today, a Twitter poll, and says if you could take Babe Ruth intact as he was, just pick him up from opening day 1927 and insert him into baseball today, would he be a superstar, a star, an above-average player, or an ordinary guy? And I say he'd be an above-average player. I'm not even sure he'd make it to the level of star. Why? Because he wasn't facing 100 miles an hour for the last 3-4 innings of every game.
Mm-hmm.
I said at the time to people who were up in arms about this, I said, if you're all that upset about Bonds hitting home runs while on steroids, I'll make you a deal. I'll subtract every home run that you think he's hit because of steroids. I'll just take it off his record, as long as you let me count double every one that he's hit off a steroided pitcher. He'll wind up with 900.
Good point. Very good point. Guys, what the sanctimonious nature that you mentioned just means that those people aren't including those who didn't get caught. Doesn't mean they didn't cheat. Just means they didn't get caught.
Well, here's where it's going to get interesting. In Bond's last year of eligibility, guess who comes on the ballot for the first time?
Jeter?
The most popular steroid user of all time, David Ortiz.
Oh, that's right. Not only that, he's a DH, and nothing is mentioned about steroids when you're talking about him.
Nothing is mentioned, and he failed the test. I mean, I'm not saying this in a pejorative sense that he was a steroid user. He was a steroid user. He failed the test. Now, how long did he use? I don't know. How much effect did it have? I don't know. But will he go in on the second or third ballot? He can take it to the bank.
Yeah. If not the first.
And if guys decide they have to break down and vote for David Ortiz, they just might possibly come to their senses and realize how illogical they are being with Bonds and Clemens if they're going to vote for Ortiz. Now, I also saw some people who said, well, if you're going to do that, then you got to find a way to get McGuire in there, to which my answer is no, you really don't, because he was, a career 260 hitter?
Right, and he wouldn't have qualified, steroids or not, scandal or not. He wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, there's a world of difference. You look at Barry Bonds' performance in the last year that he played, and you realize that if he had been allowed to play another year, he'd have had 3,000 hits and might have wound up with a 300 career batting average instead of, I think he hit 298 or 299 career. But he was just
there
shy.
are players, though, that you can make that argument for. You can say if they put Bonds in, they got to put Palermo in.
You mean Palmeiro?
Palmeiro, I never could pronounce that name. It's like
well, you don't have to say. I mean, you don't have to.
He
say
is 3,000
you have
hits.
to put Palmeiro in. Did he? I don't think.
Is he deserving steroids? If steroids weren't an issue, would Palmeiro be a Hall of Famer?
Well, now that Edgar's in, maybe he's got more of a case to be made because Palmeiro spent a lot of time as a DH. But let me.
That's true, but they put Martinez. They put Martinez in as a DH.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Now that they have put Martinez in as a DH, Palmeiro probably would have had a better shot, but there were no DHs in at the time, and so you kind of find yourself with just trying to make comparisons that are not effective and not valid because he's no longer on the ballot. Palmeiro was a little bit of a polarizing player. stop and think about it for a minute. The college team that had
Will
Jeff
Clark.
Jeff Brantley and Bobby Thigpen and Paul Merrill. I mean, that's a pretty good team right there.
Hey, let me give you one of my personal memories. You mentioned Brantley. I was the Tops rep, as you know, and went to Fresno, which at the time was an A-team managed by Wendell Kim. And I got to sign Jeff Brantley and Will Clark the same day to their Tops contracts, their first Tops contracts, which gave Tops permission to use their picture on baseball cards when they reached the big leagues, and gave those guys each $5. They called it stake money, and it just sealed the deal, and I got to see them the first day they were minor league players from Ole Miss. There was another guy too, a guy named Ohanta, who never made it, but if I'm not mistaken, he was there that day. And when I think of Jeff Brantley, I have to think of Will Clark, who, when Palmero was busted, happened to be on radio that day on KNBR. And they asked him, "What did you think about that?" And Will Clark goes, "You got busted, partner." in that Will Clark way of his. You got caught, partner. They didn't like each other, those two, as teammates.
And I owe you an apology. Rafael Palmeiro had 3,020 hits in 12,000 plate appearances.
Not a bad career.
Not a bad career. 569 home runs, 1,835 RBIs, and 1,350 walks.
Yeah, he was.
He had more walks than strikeouts by a total of 5, 1,353 to 1,348. So. Better
now,
career than I remember.
I don't think Sosa is a Hall of Famer. Steroids are not. Just doesn't have total. And he's an obvious one. He wasn't a Hall of Famer before steroids. You say what you want, but Bonds and Clemens, had they never touched the needle, would have both been in the Hall of Fame for sure.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. Trying to look up. Let's see. Now, if you look at the Hall of Fame calculators for Palmeiro, his hitting black ink, he has a score of 8, and the average Hall of Famer has a score of 27. But for gray ink, 183, placing him 53rd overall. The average Hall of Famer is only 144 points on gray ink. And the Hall of Fame monitor done by Bill James, he's ranks 58th all time with 178, which is almost 75% more than the threshold for likely Hall of Fame members. So I would say that on virtually all categories, he's going to qualify. He's listed as the 12th best first baseman of all time under Jaws. 7-year peak WAR of almost 39 wins above replacement. So that's and if you look at, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say they're deserving, but I wanted to find out a little bit about how an official scorer like yourself, what goes on before spring training? Are you getting schedules for the games you'll be working? Are you compiling an itinerary? Do you have to do that yourself? What's it like 18 days before spring training, my friend?
Well, I go down to spring training and I do my work for MLB. Now it's just MLB. It used to be MLB.com or Advanced Media, but the Disney company bought a large chunk of Advanced Media, and the data entry operations are now folded directly into the commissioner's office of MLB. So now I can say that I'm an MLB employee, which has occupied no small amount of my time this winter because we're under a different HR department, a different set of rules, a different handbook, a different set of structures to sign on to become employees, different background checks. You know, it's as though I had gone and just decided to work for a whole different sport. As far as official scoring goes, this past weekend was the annual meeting for some scorers in New York City. You know, it's an interesting thing. I'm not being critical here. I'm just pointing this out. People rag on the NFL and say, gee, their officials should be full-time employees, like baseball's umpires are, and I don't disagree with that, although I do understand what everybody says. The games are played once a week, and what are you going to do with those people 5 days a week during the 3 quarters of the year that no games are being played? You can watch all the film you want. It does not make you able to see the plays in real time. And I've said this many, many times. The best experience I had as an official scorer was the first year as a field timing coordinator before we even had the clock, and we were just literally holding up colored cards to show when it was 25 seconds and 15 seconds back from commercial breaks, and then to let the umpires know that it's okay to play any time because we're back from the break. And I did that from the dugout. I did that from the visitors' dugout at AT&T and from behind the backstop screen right there by the door where the umpires enter and exit in Oakland. And for some period of time, we actually went out on the field to show the cards. And being at field level and watching the game unfold in front of you in real-time speed with no button to push, with no replay available, just watching the game as it happens, gives you a much different appreciation for the game, the speed at which it's played, and the skill with which it is played than you can get sitting up in the press box in the official scorer's chair. And I encouraged, when I went to the meetings the next year, we have 7 scorers in the Bay Area, and 2 get to go each year. So I get to go on average about once every 3 years. When I went the next year, I encouraged everybody to just take a game and wherever you can in your ballpark, get down there to field level and watch the game. It will be revelatory. So that's part of it. I did not go to the meetings this year. This was not my turn. I am waiting for our lead scorer to send out his annual note that says, please tell me the dates you are not available. And then based on that, he divides up games as best as he can. And I am collecting data from all of my fellow inputters and all of my fellow clock watchers and getting ready to start making those schedules, which we usually make 2 months at a time. So I'll get my entire year's schedule as an official scorer from Chuck Dibdall probably around the 1st of March. And right around that same time, I have to submit the schedules for basically April and May. And then as soon as May 1st rolls around, we start working on schedules for June and July for the FTCs, and we let people adjust their schedule as need be for the data entry, because I asked those people to give me a schedule for the whole year going in, and we kind of preliminarily lay it out, but we don't assign games except in 2-month blocks, because that gives people a little opportunity to say, oh, I've decided to take a vacation then, or oh, a wedding came up that I didn't know about at the time, one of those kinds of things. So that's how it is, and there's no itineraries. Even where I travel, Ralph, like for college football, I don't find out until Monday morning where I'm going to be Sunday or Saturday.
Oh, wow.
I mean,
and you have to book your own flights and everything?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when I'm with ESPN, I book my flights through Disney's travel app, which makes it really quite easy. You go in and when we're assigned to a game, there's a show code for that game that is that allows the accounting department to attribute all of the costs of that show. And if you enter the show code, the system already knows what airport you need to fly to. It just needs to know what airport you're flying from.
What an age we live in, huh?
Yep. It's
Nice.
it's a lot easier than it used to be, that's for sure.
All right. Hey, next week when we talk, we'll do a little pre-spring training edition and kind of break it down, who the Giants have coming up, what the question marks are, this, that, and the other thing, as we've done in the past. So tease it a little bit, if you would. What, just give it a little tease. What's coming up with the Giants? What should we be excited about as Giants fans, or in my case, a Giant apologist? But what should we be worried about, and what do you find interesting about the upcoming spring training?
You should be very, very excited about Sean Anderson. You should be concerned about the fact that the most experienced outfielder on the 40-man roster is Austin Slater. And I find it very, very interesting that we're 15 days from the opening of camps, is it? 14 days? Something like that.
Okay.
And Manny Machado and Dallas Keuchel and Bryce Harper are all unemployed.
Now that brings up a good question. There has been talk that it isn't just a correction with salaries that owners are going through, and it wouldn't be above them or below them to do something to conspire in a way to keep salaries down that may end up costing a season. I mean, the players.
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, if Bryce Harper has a standing offer on the table from the Nationals for $300 million, it's hard for me to think that there's collusion going on.
Good point.
And, the other star of this show, Manny Machado, is such a polarizing figure that it's very difficult to know how to even begin to think about what's going on with him. I mean, you've got a team at China Basin who is absolutely starved for some kind of offensive output. And with Manny Machado, you've got an infielder in his early 20s with something like a 6 WAR from last year and a 970 OPS. I mean, these players don't come along very often, and especially at that young age. And yet, I have not met a single Giants fan who would be happy if the team signed him.
No, and I don't think it's
he is
a good
as
idea,
universally
given that
disliked.
They have Crawford at short.
I understand that, but they have Crawford at short. But you have to be smoking crack to not think that Manny Machado is an upgrade over Evan Longoria.
Oh, no question about that. But does he want to play third base? Is that
I don't know. I don't know any of that. And I'm not even saying that the Giants have the remotest flagging interest in him. What I'm saying is Machado has to almost be erased from the discussion about collusion because there are so many fans who would riot if their team hired him.
Right. Good point. Very good point. He not only did he step on the kid at first base in the World Series, but he had what's going to go down as the most famous quote of our time. it's not in my DNA to hustle. He says during the World Series.
Right. Now, again, you say that'll be the most famous quote of all time, and I say that by the time he's 30, people will forget it. And the reason they will forget it is that, you know, young kids say stupid stuff. And what I learned in raising 6 stepchildren, Ralph, is that kids often know what they want to say, but when they start articulating it, it doesn't come out the way they want to say it.
Hey, presidents have been known to make gaffes like
that.
Yeah,
presidents have been known to talk about walls in San Antonio when they meant San Diego. Yes, I understand that perfectly. And it happens. It's happened to me. It's happened to you. It happens to all of us. But what I'm saying with Manny is that, you know, take that sentence that you just said, it's not in my DNA to hustle, and add one word to it and see how it changes everything. It's not in my DNA to falsely hustle.
Right. Good point. And then you can go back. Was Pete Rose part of that false hustle?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was known as Charlie Hustle, but it turned out that he was really Charlie Hustler.
You wordsmith, you. That's what you get away with all the time, is just changing those words to appear to be bright. Well, you are bright. Never mind. Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Great show.
One cannot appear to be bright. The lumens are what the lumens are.
Right.
You can either read by it or you can't. So
no, you are
definitely.
You are unbelievably bright. This is so much fun for me. Thank you, Michael. You give me an insight into all of the backstage stuff. It's tremendous. Giant fans, be grateful. Michael Duca is as good as it gets. You're welcome at Comfortably Zoned for the life. You have a lifetime pass at Comfortably Zoned. How about that?
Well, thank you. And before we go away, I just want to close with one more thought, and that is, let us not also forget about the late Peter Mcgowan, that he was also the first CEO in all of sports to acknowledge the reality of the AIDS epidemic, to acknowledge the reality of the fact that people, including his fan base, were affected by it, and to work with my friend, the late, great Rod Beck, and his wife, Stacy, to bring to fruition Until There's a Cure Day, which was the first time any sports franchise anywhere in the world had done something like that.
Nice. That really is heartening. Let's put it that way. That should be on his tombstone.
Yeah, and for those of us who think that the world has been rent asunder and can never be brought back together, let me also remind you that Peter Mcgowan was a devout Republican.
Well,
and still had goodness in his heart and showed it every day.
Very good point. Very good point. Let's look back for a second on Rod Beck. Rod Beck was signed originally by the Oakland A's, and he was traded. He was traded for a kid named Charlie Corbell when they were both in the low minors.
A-ball.
So in A-ball, yes, and Rod Beck was another one of those guys that I signed to his Topps contract back in the day, and what a character. This guy was just the good die young. That's the only thing I can tell you.
Yeah, well, I'll just put it this way. If the people you want to know are the salt of the earth, Rod Beck was the salt mine.
Nice. So, two great giants, rest in peace. Rod Beck,
losing Willie McCovey and Hank Greenwald and Peter Mcgowan all within the span of 2 months. It's been a tough time.
Yep. Hank comes to mind. You gave me the most heartening news on the late Hank. His daughter still is with us, and she's doing well. That made me happy when you said that.
Oh yeah, Kelly's a Spitfire and going strong. Believe me.
Good. Thank you, sir. Thank you for listening, everybody. The show is San Francisco Giants baseball, and the man himself. I'm Ralph Tycho, the weak link of it all at Comfortably Zoned Radio. Adios, everybody. Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.